bit that just sounded to me like the Carter family singing it, and it was this beautiful hymn. And he had the entire choir singing it. I thought it would sound better had he had a duet to get that country sound. It was so country just for that one little bit.
Yes, but, I
would agree. But Tim doesn't have that background, and I'm not necessarily correct.
Sure.
But I heard that in the original recording. They had chosen to just use a couple of women, and they achieved that Carter family sound just through that product. Because Carol Burnett was importing so many genres into that mass. It wasn't just a bluegrass mass. There was one piece where I swear she channeled Ozzy Osbourne and Black Sabbath.
Oh my God.
And I brought that up to Tim, and yeah, that's a Black Sabbath interpretation.
Wow. Michelina. Thanks. I didn't see him come up. Okay. Folks, we are without a TV screen this morning, so the first hymn is in your gray hymnal. It is number 361, Rise as You're Willing and Able.
Open your Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, where our mission is to join together to create a nourishing, liberal religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in our wider world, or as we say in short, to find meaning and work for justice. Good job. It's great to hear that echoed in this sanctuary again. Glad to have all of you here. Thanks to those of you who are streaming with us as well today. It's great to have all of you with us. So we've got folks that are here in person and folks that are here with us virtually, and it's a wonderful way to commune together today. So welcome to one and all. As always, I embrace all that you bring today, all your unique beliefs, your background, your lifestyle, your experiences, all that helps make you who you are. Glad to have you. I guess most of you heard the CDC announcement this week, so masks are optional. If you're comfortable not wearing one, you're welcome to do so. And by the way, we'll probably, I'm gonna think about it this week and talk with some folks, but I think that we'll probably be making an announcement by the end of the week as to when we will open our church up to everybody. I think by now everybody should have at least had an opportunity to schedule a vaccine, if not gotten one, who wants to have one. So we will probably be opening up sooner than later. And as creative as the practice social distancing tape is, I think we will probably be getting rid of that fairly soon too. So, but stay tuned this week for more on that. And also, I'm glad that Jean brought this up. Many of you have been attending. Some of you know we've been having a Wednesday night book study with some congregations from around the region of Irshad Manji's book, Don't Label Me, which has been a lot of fun. We break into breakout sessions of 6 people or so to talk about the selections that we've read, and then have a couple of common periods before and after. This Wednesday, Jay Kiskell and Frank Casper, who are the founders of the Fifth Principle Project and also the authors of the recent book, Used to Be You, which if you've not heard of and not read it, I highly recommend. It's a very well-researched book, well-substantiated, hard to argue against, that talks about what in the world happened to the Unitarian Universalist Association that caused it to become so undemocratic in recent years. They're able to trace that down through the documentation and policies of the organization itself, so you can see how that's happening and hopefully what we can do about it. But Jay Kiskell is running for the UUA board this year, and he and I believe Frank both are going to be attending Wednesday night's meeting, and the last part of the meeting we'll be able to field some questions to Jay. So I want to invite everybody to attend that, even if you haven't been able to make the meeting so far. And also the following Wednesday is when Irshad Manji will be speaking, and the entire 2 hours will be her speaking to us and addressing some of our questions. So I would invite you to check that out as well. Put that on your calendar. And I also want to begin by mentioning obviously a lot of you realize there's been increasing tensions in the Middle East between Israel and the Palestinian people, which has surprisingly resulted in widespread protest in the United States on behalf of the Palestinian peoples. I say surprising because that's not happened before, right? This has been something that those who have wanted to talk about have not been able to get any attention to, and have often been severely rebuked or punished for even suggesting that we need to respond differently to the Palestinian people, including myself, who, about the time I was being named racist, homophobic, transphobic, ableist classist, was also called an anti-Semite. So I'm getting used to it. But there is going to be a local demonstration tomorrow at the Federal Building at noon on behalf of Palestinian rights. So I'm going to be there, and I thought some of you might want to be there as well. As a lot of you know, I've not been attending a lot of protests and demonstrations in recent years, largely because I don't like what I see happening there from our side, if you will. And so if I'm uncomfortable with what I see going on, I will leave. But I am so pleased to see that there is a shift in our country going on around this issue, a recognition that no matter what's going on over there, innocent people who are stuck behind in what is essentially a cage should not be bombed and harmed in the process. At the same time, I would acknowledge that our local Jewish neighbors have obviously very good reason to be overly sensitive and overly afraid to any hint of anti-Semitic feelings. And a lot of folks in the Jewish community see any talk at all of Palestinian rights as a criticism of Jews. And I would imagine that many of them are terrified right now to see this happening in this country. So I would also ask you to remain compassionate and respectful towards our Jewish neighbors. Okay, so that was what I wanted to start with. And I also want to give you an opportunity to visit one another for just a few moments, to greet one another. And those of you who are streaming with us, please take a few moments, if you will, to text somebody or call somebody or email somebody that you're thinking of. So please, go ahead. The whole face, too.
I love it. I didn't get it.
People just started reaching out. Everyone kind of looked and smiled. All right, and hopefully we can visit some more following the service, but let's move forward now by lighting our chalice, the symbol of our faith, the symbol of our unity and our solidarity, of our openness and our inclusion, of our community and our individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need, and may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt wherever it's been found.
Our opening words are from poet John O'Donohue, although this isn't a poem, unless you call it a prose poem. Anyway, all through your life, the most precious experiences seem to vanish. Transience turns everything to air. You look behind and see no sign even of a yesterday that was so intense. Yet in truth, nothing ever disappears. Nothing is lost. Everything that happens to us in the world passes into us. It all becomes part of the inner temple of the soul, and it can never be lost. This is the art of the soul, to harvest your deeper life from all the seasons of your experience. This is probably why the soul never fully surfaces. The intimacy and tenderness of its light would blind us. We continue in our days to wander between the shadowing and the brightening, while all the time a more subtle brightness sustains us. If we could but realize the sureness around us, we would be more courageous in our lives. The frames of anxiety that keep us caged would dissolve. We would live the life we love, and in that way, day by day, free our future from the weight of regret.
Well, I got to pick a favorite hymn that I've loved for years for this morning. I think it captures the energy that I feel, at least, for us all coming back together, those of us who can come here. And it's an onward and upward kind of hymn. So please rise as you're willing and able to sing number 12 in your gray hymnal. Number 12, O life that maketh all things new.
It is time for our story for all ages. And one of my favorite people in the whole world has come today to help out. There we go. Hello, Pooh. What are you doing here in the 100-acre woods? Well, I'm not. I'm afraid you're the one who's out of place, Pooh. Neither of us is in the 100-acre wood. Oh, daughter, I must have taken a wrong turn. Well, perhaps so, but it's always good to see you, so good to have you here today. Good to see you, too. Is this the place where you talk a lot? Well, yes, this is church, and it is my job to say something, to talk about something. Are you going to talk about honey? I'm not so sure about that. For some reason, honey is on my mind. Well, that doesn't surprise me. But I'm not going to talk about honey. I'm talking about something else today. Well, what else is there to talk about? Well, it may not be as interesting as honey, but to put it simply, I like simple. Yes, I know you do. I'm going to talk about not falling victim to circumstances. I thought you said it was going to be simple. What I mean is I'm going to talk about not allowing our problems to prevent us from becoming our best. Well, that doesn't sound simple to me. I understand. Well, let's see how I can best explain this to you, you poo. Okay, I got it. I remember the time that you ate a little too much honey, or maybe a lot of too much honey, and got stuck in the hole leaving Rabbit's house? Yes, but it was worth it. Yes, I'm sure. But it also left Rabbit with a big problem. Yes, he didn't want to have to look at my back. Yes, that's right. If I have to face it for months, I think he said, I might as well make the best of it. So he rearranged the furniture to look in the other direction. But he could still see me in the mirror. Yes, he could. So he tried to turn the mirror toward the wall, and he ended up breaking off the frame. Oh, bother. Yes, it was a bother, but he made the best of that situation, too, by placing the frame around your back. And then he decorated your back to make you one of the most wonderful art pieces. And then I sneezed. Yes, and then you sneezed and messed it up, but that's okay because you soon got unstuck. But the point here is that rather than being miserable, Rabbit did what he could do to make the best of the situation. Like when I got my head stuck in the honey pot and licked it all up. Yes, that's a good thing to do if your head is stuck in a honey pot. And if you're going to have your head stuck, why not have it stuck in a honey pot? Better than some other places. Well, that does sound like a good thing to say, but since you've already said it, I think I'll leave. Okay. Yes, all this talk of honey leaves a rumly in my tumbly. Okay. See you next time, Pooh. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Our special offertory for the month of May is for Mid-City Senior Center Meals on Wheels. Since 1967, Mid-City Senior Center has provided a nutritional and social lifeline for seniors through their downtown meal site in Spokane, as well as Meals to Wheels delivery to elderly, disabled, or homebound seniors. Pre-COVID, the center was open 5 days a week and provided a warm, inviting, and safe atmosphere for men and women who are predominantly living alone. They are eagerly working toward reopening their in-person meal service. They have also just embarked on a big project to update their kitchen with new equipment that will allow them to prepare all their meals on wheels on site. This will create a more centralized supply chain and improve the quality and freshness of their food. In 2020, they served over 182,000 meals to 500 seniors. Their goal this year is to feed an additional 10,000 meals to homebound seniors in our community. If you'd like more information, you can check out the Sun article. We now gratefully give and receive this morning's offering, which sustains this community and its mission to the larger world.
Thanks again, Dan. We're now going to kindle our candles of care for those who are most on our thoughts and minds. I did not get any specific request today, but certainly want to begin with a candle calling for nonviolent solutions in our world. And let's take a moment of silence on behalf of those you might be thinking of, and as always, you're welcome to name them aloud if you'd like. Those named aloud and those embraced in our silence, and all those who are suffering in our world at this hour, we hold in our community with compassion.
Now is the time in our service for meditation or contemplation. I invite you to find a receptive posture. Close your eyes if you wish, and take a couple of deep breaths. I will lead you into the silence following these words from poet Rolf Jacobson. All people are children when they sleep. There's no war in them then. They open their hands and breathe in that quiet rhythm heaven has given them. If only we could speak to one another then, when our hearts are half-open flowers. Words like golden bees would drift in.
For our reading today, I'm going to ask you to join me in a responsive reading, number 517 in the back of the gray hymnal, number 517. By the way, for those who are streaming with us, I apologize that our screen isn't working today. Our laptop decided to update, and we've not been able to get it to work, so I apologize. We'll try to get that back for you next week, as well as for those of you here who enjoy seeing the lyrics on the screen. I'm sorry. But I'm going to, I'll begin and ask the congregation to be our respondents today on 517. And I'm reading this because I think it's such a beautiful time right now as things start to unfold and come to life. So, I who am the beauty of the green earth and the white moon among the stars and the mysteries of the waters, for I am the soul of nature that gives life to the universe.
From me all things proceed, and
Let my worship be in the heart that rejoices, for behold, all acts of love and pleasure are my rituals. And you who seek to know me, know that your seeking and yearning will avail you not unless you know the mystery. For behold, I have been with you from the beginning. Thanks again, Dan. One of the great things about having two services is I get to hear the music twice. Dan is a very talented musician, and what a gift it is to have you part of our community. Thank you.
It was his arrangement, too.
That was his arrangement?
Yes.
Doesn't surprise me. Yeah. Great job. This morning I want to expound or attempt to expound upon what I consider is a remarkable statement from a little-known philosopher, Gilles Deleuze. He was born in Paris in 1925, committed suicide in 1995, so really a contemporary fellow after his lifelong and worsening issues with a lung disease that inevitably left him almost unable to breathe, let alone do anything else. And I won't say much more about his life or go too deeply into his philosophy, neither of which are my focus. Suffice it to say that Deleuze considered himself an empiricist. And his philosophical views about empiricism are a little novel. Empiricism, like it sounds, is knowledge based upon experience, and sensual experience in particular. And it does not necessarily deny that there may be something beyond such physical experience, only that we should base our understanding of the world upon what we are able to experience and hence experiment with. What made Deleuze's empiricism unique is that he did disbelieve that there is anything beyond our sensual experience, that there's only one plane of experience. All that exists is immanent, not transcendent. Immanence refers to that which is empirically real. Transcendence refers to something that is beyond our experience. And I'm sure that many would like to argue otherwise, but since by definition we cannot sensually experience the transcendent, transcendence is nonsense. Right? That's his logical argument, right, Shane? And so the point here is that Deleuze's lean idea of empiricism led him to also to have some novel ideas about how we ought to live our lives. Firstly, he placed far less emphasis on personal identity and more on individual change. This is so, he reasoned, because our sense of identity as a musician, as Dan is, for example, is because one is different from those who don't play music. If one is identified as an author, it's because one is different from somebody who is not. Although such differences may cause us to identify with others like us, it is still because of how we differ from most that causes us to have an identity. So even twins who may be remarkably similar, Don Willingham knows this, they remain individuals. We recognize them as individuals, not as the same person, because they are far more different than they are alike. So Deleuze places greater emphasis upon the differences that make us up than our identities. Our experiences, which are always changing, always different, have more of an influence over us than do our identities. For we exist not as isolated individuals inside of an environment, but always in relationship to our experiences, to the surroundings, and the events happening around us and to us. We are those things. We are a relationship. And we are within the context of a relationship with what's happening around us. So in this way, we're always becoming different than we previously were before things changed around us. or before we found ourselves in a new relationship in time, location, and circumstance. So even if you're sitting here not doing much different than you were just a few seconds ago, your relationship to time has changed. The thoughts in your head have subtly shifted. The winds outside have moved. And all of this is part of the relationship that we exist in. If you can see yourself as part of a relationship. So, if we're always becoming relatively different, right, relatively different than we were before, because our relationships are constantly changing, so we're becoming relatively different, then we are always becoming. We are different from moment to moment. So for Deleuze, we're not identities, we're becoming. That's what our existence is, becoming. A very different concept. So with this in mind, Deleuze also altered the idea of eternal recurrence. Now that was an idea made popular by Friedrich Nietzsche, the claim that all of existence is infinitely recurring. Although the concept goes, back to the ancient Egyptians and to Hinduism and, of course, to Buddhism, it was, for Nietzsche, the result of his own thought experiment. His argument was, since the universe is infinite, and there are an infinite number of possibilities, then our world must recur an infinite number of times. So not only are there two snowflakes that are just alike, but there are an infinite number of snowflakes that are just alike. And that's a really hard concept for us to grasp from our limited perspective, but mathematically speaking, considering the meaning of the term infinite, it's a pretty good argument. It's hard to argue against, right? Because infinite means endless. In the scheme of endlessness, everything's going to repeat itself. That's the argument. Still, Deleuze didn't quite accept Nietzsche's thought experiment. He agreed that things may eternally recur, given infinity, but not exactly like they were. And that it is our job to make certain of this, that they are not exactly like they were. He believed that changing, becoming different, hopefully for the better, is the purpose of our lives. So that's all I'll say about Deleuze's mind-bending ideas here, for those who don't enjoy philosophy, except for Shane. I know he's back there on the edge of his seat. He probably knows more about Deleuze than I do. You've heard of him? No? He's one of the Continentals, so, right. Who cares about the Continentals? Shane does, to an extent, yep. But so there is this. This is. I think you'll love this. This is why I did the sermon. Okay. Because I discovered this remarkable statement just a few weeks ago in his 1969 book, The Logic of Sense, and just such a profound statement that I said, this is going to be a sermon. I've got to know more about this. So here's what he said: either ethics makes no sense at all, or this is what it means and has nothing else to say. He's about to tell us what ethics means, right? Not to be unworthy of what happens to us. That's the phrase. Not to be unworthy of what happens to us. It's stuck with me. Ethics, you may recall, comes from the Greek word ethos, meaning character. Our ethics have to do with who we are and what we are about. For Deleuze, this means that our moral purpose is to remain worthy of what happens to us in life. That's our human purpose, to remain worthy of what happens to us. And there's a lot of discuss, for example, these days about those who are perceived to have some privilege, as if they should be ashamed of having good experiences and opportunities. For Deleuze, there's nothing wrong with having a good life, but as ethical beings, as persons of quality character, we ought to make sure we remain worthy of the privileges that we have. We can waste our advantages in life by simply doing what we want when we want, seeking the instant gratification of our most immediate and individual desires. Or we can use what advantages we have by recognizing our relationship and thus our responsibility to others. In other words, we can use the good in our lives for the good of all. But what most intrigues me about Deleuze's secret to life, not to become unworthy of what happens to us, is that it also implies how we ought to respond to the challenges and to the miseries that befall us. There is much suffering in life. I don't care how privileged a person is considered by others. We are all complex individuals, and we all know what it is to feel pain and to feel grief and loss and fear and adversity. What Deleuze is suggesting is that we must also remain worthy of our suffering. Think about that. We must remain worthy, or we must not, more likely, we must not become unworthy of our suffering. How's that for a statement? We must not become unworthy of our suffering. We should make our struggles and challenges mean something. As individual identities, we believe pain, grief, loss, fear, and adversity happen to us. I'm an individual, isolated from all of this stuff. So these things happen to me. We're isolated entities stuck in time and space, when and where things happen to us. And the hapless pawns in eternity's game. We're victims of circumstance, we say. I'm just a victim of circumstance. But as beings that are always becoming, we see ourselves that way, always changing, always a little different than we were before, entwined with all that is happening around us. Everything we experience is part of who we become. Our moral responsibility, according to Deleuze, is not to be unworthy of what happens to us by changing for the better. Notice that he doesn't say that we should become worthy of what happens to us, but that we should not become unworthy of it. I didn't get that at first, but when I realized the significance of his phrasing, I changed the title of my sermon from "Become Worthy of What Happens to Us" to "Remaining Worthy of What Happens to Us." Deleuze accepts that we are already worthy of both the goodness and the difficulties in our lives. Not because they're magical rewards or punishments placed upon us by the gods and the fates, but because good and bad things happen to all of us. That's part of what it is to be human. The question for us, the ethical question, is who are we going to become because of our privileges and our problems? Are we going to be selfish hoarders who enjoy all that we have even as others suffer around us? Are we going to wallow in regret and resentment because of the misfortunes and injustices that have befallen us in life, despite our absolute inability to change the past? Are we going to become unthinking pawns in somebody else's game rather than achieving our fullest potential, purpose, and autonomy, despite those who want to control us? These are the unfortunate choices made by some whom, in so doing, become unworthy of what happens to them because their experiences didn't really result in anything truly productive They remain caught in a cycle of eternal return, in the Buddhist hell of samsara, repeating the same life, the same choices, the same mistakes, again and again, whether for eternity or, as I believe is more likely the case, merely throughout one's own lifetime, which is a tragedy, to live a whole life repeating the same mistakes over and over and over and over again. But if we see ourselves as actors within the positive and negative circumstances of our lives, realizing the good and bad don't simply happen to us, but that we live in relationship to all that occurs, then we realize that we have a role to play in the outcome, a proper response, an ethical choice to make. The good and bad we experience will make our lives different, but we do have some choice in determining what that means for us, in determining who we are going to become as a result. For these are not events that happen to us. They are our events. They are our events. They belong to us. They are us. To take an active role in how we respond, Deleuze says, is to become the offspring of one's own events and thereby be reborn, to have one more birth and to break with one's carnal birth. There's an obvious tendency to take these religious and otherwise esoteric ideas literally: reincarnation, eternal return, you must be born again. But if these are just mythical ideas and philosophical thought experiments that work as metaphors to help us understand the human experience, then they serve to remind us how often we can get caught up in our own ways, how often we get stuck repeating the same patterns, including holding the same worn-out ideas and making the same mistakes again and again. What Deleuze is saying is that the events in our lives don't just happen to us. They belong to us. And we thus have an ethical responsibility to determine how they're going to shape us. We can consider them circumstances beyond our control that alter us as they please with no regard for our own agency, becoming what they make of us, or we can work to make things better. And I didn't say that we can choose to become something better. I said we can work to do so. Being reborn, changing our ways, is never easy, especially in the face of tragedy and other life-altering events. It takes time working through the grief and adjusting to the loss and learning to live again with whatever disabilities and losses we are left with. Because sometimes we face things that are life-altering. But life is always being altered anyway, if we're always becoming. So it's not always easy, but again, ethics means character, and developing the character to help guide us who we are to become in the future and in the very next moment is what being ethical is all about, or nothing else, according to Gilles Deleuze. So all of this causes me to think of a real-life example. One of my great heroes, Frederick Douglass. He was born a slave. Exactly when, he did not know, to a mother whom he never did know. But it was fairly obvious that his father was the man who owned him, whom he only knew as his master. The master's wife was not too fond of their resemblance, so Douglass was eventually sent away to be ruled by another master. Despite the cruelty of this new master and the daily fear that he lived in, Douglass secretly learned to read and came to recognize and despise the system of slavery that he had been born into. Though every circumstance insisted that he was unworthy of dignity, let alone his freedom, Douglas fought in every way for his chance to fully unfold as an individual. Because that's what our life is about, fully unfolding. That's the drive in us. Just like the seed breaks open and fully unfolds, that's life. That's what we do. So ever defiant to the forces holding him back, he was eventually sent to Edward Covey for a year, a sadistic man known for his ability to break the will of any defiant slave. Covey began with a routine of almost weekly whippings, harsh enough to leave Douglas's back with wounds severe enough they could have killed him. When, while working in the fields, Douglas collapsed in exhaustion due to the beatings, he was beaten even worse. Although it was only supposed to last a year, it was not long, only a few months, before Covey accomplished his goal. I was somewhat unmanageable when I first went there, but a few months of this discipline tamed me, Douglas recounts in the narrative of his life. Mr. Covey succeeded in breaking me. I was broken in body, soul, and spirit. My natural elasticity was crushed. My intellect languished. My disposition to read departed. My cheerful spark that lingered about my eye died. The dark night of slavery closed in upon me, and behold, a man transformed into a brute. About 6 months into his stay, under Covey's vicious control, Douglas again collapsed in exhaustion while working in the fields, for which Covey nearly cracked his head open for slowing down the work. He left to seek refuge from the man who lent him to Covey, who was still his official owner. Despite his bloodied and beaten appearance, the man gave him no solace, nor even a meal before sending him back to the sadistic tyrant. After some trickery, Covey attacked Douglas in the stables and tried to bind him with a rope upon which he would have likely beat him to death. Douglas writes, "As soon as I found what he was up to, I gave a sudden spring, and as I did so, he holding my legs, I was brought sprawling to the stable floor. Mr. Covey seemed now to think he had me and could do what he pleased, but at this moment, from whence the spirit came I do not know, I resolved to fight. And suiting my actions to the resolution, I seized Covey hard by the throat, and as I did so, I rose. He held on to me, and I to him. My resistance was so entirely unexpected that Covey seemed taken all aback. He trembled like a leaf. The two men fought hard for 2 hours before Covey finally gave up in exhaustion. I considered him as getting entirely the worst end of the bargain, for he had drawn no blood from me, but I had from him. The whole 6 months afterwards I spent with Mr. Covey, he never laid the weight of his finger upon me in anger. He would occasionally say he didn't want to get a hold of me again. No, I thought, you need not, for you will come off worse than you did before." Later in his autobiography, Douglas makes what I consider among the most profound statements I've ever heard in my life. "I now resolved that however long I may remain a slave in form, the day had passed forever that I could be a slave in fact." Despite remaining Covey's slave for another 6 months and for longer after that, Douglas liberated himself that day. It rekindled the few expiring embers of freedom and revived within me a sense of my own manhood. It recalled the departed self-confidence and inspired me again with a determination to be free. The gratification afforded by the triumph was a full compensation for whatever else might follow, even death itself. He only can understand the deep satisfaction which I experienced, who has himself repelled by force the bloody arm of slavery. I felt as I never felt before. It was a glorious resurrection, from the tomb of slavery to the heaven of freedom. My long-crushed spirit rose, cowardice departed, bold defiance took its place, and I now resolved that, however long I might remain a slave in form, the day had passed forever when I could be a slave in fact. Life was not easy after that, but Douglas did eventually also become legally free and became a famous orator, author, abolitionist, women's suffragist. In 1889, President Benjamin Harrison appointed him the U.S. ambassador to Haiti. The accomplished statesman was also the first and so far the only black man nominated to be Vice President of the United States on the ticket of the then Equal Rights Party. It would be some time after his fight with Kobe that he would accomplish these things, but that was the day that he refused to be somebody that things happened to. It was when he took charge of his life, the day that he truly became free. For me, Douglas is an extraordinary example of a person who did not allow himself to become unworthy of what happened to him. This is not to imply that he was to blame for the cruelty he endured or that he deserved it. Of course not. But that he did not let it completely define who he would become. He did not make an identity of it. He would not remain under the circumstances. His beatings did not beat him down. He was the master of his fate, not the victim of circumstance. He took charge of his unfolding and of how he would allow his experience, even the harshest, to shape him. Although few of us have experienced anything like what Frederick Douglass went through, all of us find ourselves in challenging circumstances and may feel that there is nothing that we can do to change them. And this is often so, but it seldom means that we have to let those circumstances, the unexpected and undeserved events in our lives, define who we become. We always have an ethical choice to make, a moral obligation to ourselves, not to become unworthy of what happens to us. Thank you.
We're going to close with a black spiritual today. It's one of those call and response things, but we can all sing all of it. It's number 348 in your gray hymnal. That's 348. And the name is Guide My Feet. Please rise as you're willing and able.
Guide my feet.
Our benediction today is by Wendell Berry. It may be that when we no longer know which way to go, we have come to our real journey. The mind that is not baffled is not employed. The impeded stream is the one that sings. Oh, Amen, blessed be, salam alaikum, and shalom.
Shalom.